least one unavoidable set of reducible configurations. Unavoidable means that every map must contain at least one of them, and reducible means that whichever one it is, then the proof can be completed. But can such a set be constructed? The answer came 124 years after De Morgan had originally written his letter. If you look at a copy of the documents on the 23rd of July, 1976, you will read the following story. Two American mathematicians have just announced that they have solved a proposition that has been puzzling their kind for more than 100 years. It is simply that 4 is the maximum number of colors needed on any map so that no two contiguous countries are colored the same. It goes on to say, their proof, published today, runs to 100 pages of summary, 100 pages of detail, and a further 700 pages of backup work. The two mathematicians concerned were Professors Kenneth Appel and Wolfgang Parker of the University of Illinois. How did they go about constructing an unavoidable set of reducible configurations?
Well, the first difficulty was that it wasn't clear that the conjecture was true. And if it was true, it wasn't clear that it could be solved by Kemp's technique. And if it could be solved by Kemp's technique, it wasn't certain that this could be done in a reasonable length of time. For instance, if the number of configurations was too large, or if the time was required by the computer to check one configuration was too large, the problem would be impossible. The difficulty in checking reducibility depended on the size of the configuration, where the size is measured by the number of countries neighboring the configuration which were not in the configuration. If the size was 8, it would take quite a while by hand. If the size was 14, it would take 4,000 times that long by hand. The second problem was the general problem of finding unavoidable sets of configurations which hadn't been studied sufficiently thoroughly at that time.
And this was the approach they took.
Well, we had a method of estimating how likely a configuration was to be reducible. Of course, that was not a sure thing, but it had about 80 to 90% accuracy. And so we started to first find an unavoidable set of likely reducible configurations in order to see how large the set would be. And much later, we started really having a computer to check reducibility. So that was a fortunate strategy, which saved much computer time.
The computer was used to check the reducibility of about 2,000 configurations. Checking even a single one of these configurations by hand would have been excessively time-consuming.
For one of the more difficult configurations, we would estimate that a man who was working a 40-hour week would take about 5 years to check the type of output a computer might give.
It would be a pile of paper like this just for one configuration if we had the computer print everything. Now you imagine this 2,000 times. 2,000 times that time would be higher than the entire statement.
Eventually, they could actually prove the theorem.
In the spring of 1976, we became more and more convinced that eventually we would be successful. In June of 1976, we were sufficiently convinced to write a note on our departmental blackboard which read, modulo careful checking, and appears that 4 colors suffice. In another month, we submitted our manuscript, and the Department of Mathematics at the University of Illinois decided to use part of our note for their institutional advertising on a postage meter.
And that was a substantial achievement. At first, some mathematicians seemed unhappy with the idea of a computer-based proof. But as the methods used became clearer, the proof became generally accepted by the mathematical community. So, given the complexities of the problem, it's hardly surprising that we mathematicians of the 19th century could only make limited progress. and that it took 124 years to find the eventual solution.